MultimediaJay radio style.
Okay, follow-up segment time. This is going to be linked with the intermission from earlier, and I mentioned that the discussion about World of Warcraft and how it can catch up to its competition was going to intermission because there's not much more I can really say between now and BlizzCon. We got to see what the next big announcements are and stuff along those lines. But hey, responding to listener feedback is definitely still on the table, and talking about some of these other things that people bring up is definitely still on the table. So let's take a look at this comment here. Surprised you didn't talk about the Hong Kong fiasco, as that is going to probably be what's on people's minds the most when BlizzCon comes around, and it's probably going to be another Diablo Immortal situation again, lol. Thanks for the feedback. The thing is, though, BlizzCon is still several weeks away. If folks are still this outraged about the whole Blitzchung thing by the time BlizzCon rolls around, it'll just be more WoW players being negative all the time as usual. The sort of stuff I've already come to expect from that game's player base, so it's not anything all that wild and crazy as far as I'm concerned. I didn't want to get too wrapped up in this either, because, first of all, J. Allen Brack, this is yet another thing I've seen Blizzard do before. J. Allen Brack posted an actual official Blizzard statement regarding the whole situation with Blitzchung on the way out of the office door on a Friday. Yeah, we've seen this before. A lot of controversial hot button stuff gets blue posts on Fridays, right as a 9 to 5 or Monday to Friday office worker doohickeys work week is coming to an end. There's been some very hot button changes announced or other things posted on Friday afternoons at the very, very, very end of a work week. And it looks like this one is the latest one. Again, it's not something that I haven't seen before from Blizzard. And if people are still ferocious about this sort of stuff at BlizzCon in a couple of weeks, that kind of negativity won't be anything that I haven't seen before with WoW players either. So it's kind of a back and forth. It's almost chicken and egg at this point, where the problems are coming from. Is it coming from the way Blizzard runs things, or is it just coming from the people they have to deal with? So I really don't know at this point. But I'm going to link to J. Allen Brack's official response in the description, both on MMO Champion and the actual Blizzard post. I'm not going to recap the entire thing here because it's pretty lengthy. The big thing that J. Allen Brack goes over is that Blizzard and the folks in charge thought about what they had done and thought they might have gone too far in some areas, so Blitzchung's penalties are actually going to be rescinded a bit. He's looking at now a 6-month suspension from competition and getting his prize money back for winning the tournament. But there were some other points in there as well. Like, for example, China was not part of the problem. I don't believe any of that. I think it's simply marketing and stuff. Blizzard will never admit that this had anything to do with anything because it's all part of just the market situation that they're in, with having large presences in multiple markets with conflicting political views. But there's something even bigger, though, that really catches my eye from a multimedia perspective, and that is this doubling down on the point that Blitzchung, in throwing in a political message while on the air, so to speak, basically hijacked the broadcast away from its intended focus, which was the game, the tournament, and turned it into a platform to express political views. That has some wild card discussions from my perspective as a multimedia guy, but we'll get to that. In terms of this whole situation with Blitzchung, I wasn't going to get all wrapped up in it because I'm not going to be all jumpy and knee-jerk respond to every single thing that Blizzard does, especially in this case, where there is a not-so-Blizzard-specific explanation for why this happened. Blizzard is involved in multiple markets with large potential customer bases where there are clashing political views on things like free speech. And this isn't something that has an awful lot of precedent, as a lot of this has to do with the rise of China in recent years in terms of the Chinese economy and in terms of how the built-up parts of China are really rocketing forward, even compared to the way that China was when I was a kid. So a lot has changed, and some of this is stuff that's rather unprecedented. Previously, maybe we would have had this kind of controversial discussion about North America versus the EU with the European Union and some of the regulations that they love over there on that side of the pond. We might have had this kind of conflict between North American and EU customers, but now, of course, China's gotten big enough to be part of this discussion as well. And there are some things, of course, because of the nature of the centralized command and control over in China, that is rather weird to folks like myself from the States. I'll just give you an example, and this goes back many years ago with World of Warcraft players when the game first launched in China, and Blizzard had to do business based on the local culture. One of the things that came up in those discussions was that folks in China have this view that the internet is something that you pay for by the hour in a computer cafe. Not so much, I have a computer at home and I pay a monthly bill for my internet and stuff. It's actually notably more acceptable among a lot of folks in China to just go to the local cafe and rent the internet by the hour and play World of Warcraft in those cafes. And there's some other countries where that happens too. There was a rather infamous example of someone actually passing away from playing WoW way too long in one sitting. And they were doing that in a computer cafe, paying for access to the game and access to the internet by the hour. So if you're trying to become a large player in multiple large markets where one group of customers is not going to really be able to relate to the other group of customers all that well, you run the risk of these kinds of awkward situations. I don't think this needs to be Blizzard specific. I think something could have happened with, say, a Rocket League tournament or something like that, and we could have seen something like this, and it would have gotten the same kind of negative response from us folks in the West who don't like censorship. It's just part of the new world that we live in, where we have all of these emerging markets, and sometimes they're showing up in places where we're not used to seeing them. I mean, gigantic corporations and tons of enterprise and foreign investment in communist China. To somebody who grew up during the tail end of the Cold War, what does that even look like? If you grew up with any amount of Americans worrying about the Soviets, for example, and now, all these decades later, you see China sometimes appearing to love capitalism more than some democratic parts of the world, what do you do with that? And I think it's these kinds of unanswered questions that lead to situations like this. This is a question that every company that wants to have big presences in China and other big markets around the world is going to have to answer, or find some kind of answer to, if there even is a way of reconciling the different views that your demographics in these two markets are going to have. So I wasn't going to get all wrapped up in this whole thing, because I know that a lot of the reason why it's such a big thing is because it's not something that has become too commonplace yet. But I think we're going to see more of this. I think we'll see more of this as more of these multinationals decide to try and get involved in China in some way, shape, or form and run into situations like this. But I think that if I get too wrapped up in even this kind of discussion, I'm barking up the wrong tree, because there's something else in J. Allen Brack's statement that really bothers me about Blizzard. Here I am looking to see if World of Warcraft is going to improve versus its competition and wondering, does Blizzard have the communication, the feedback, the resources, and the mindset to fix the problems with this MMO? And then I see something in this statement that rings a very nasty bell in my head. And it has to do with the things that J. Allen Brack has decided to double down on and the unintended consequences of doubling down on these very things. Remember, we're talking about somebody who is speaking for the company, so you could swap out J. Allen Brack for Blizzard for this sort of thing. And because this is official correspondence, you probably should do that. This may not even be 100% his view personally, but it's part of what he's doing professionally as the role he plays as part of Blizzard. So this is pretty disturbing. Now, when you're dealing with difficult people situations, one of the soft skills, if you will, that's worth taking a look at and trying to develop is the ability to recognize situations, tough people situations, where the party involved is either malicious or incompetent. There is no third option. Logically, the only two outcomes that could possibly exist in a situation are that the party involved is either malicious or incompetent. I think this is one of those situations. On the malicious side of things, there's people out there that have chimed in on this situation that very much think that Western U.S. customers like myself are now second-rate customers to Blizzard because they want to cash in on the growing Chinese gaming market, and that we're going to start seeing the values of Blizzard get challenged by the differences in culture between the U.S. and China. It looks like this statement is supposed to respond to some of those allegations, but unfortunately, if I give Blizzard the benefit of the doubt with this statement that it is 100% correct and Blizzard isn't trying to cover anything up and they're not trying to pull any stunts here, then to move away from believing that Blizzard was maliciously doing what people have accused them of doing in the blogosphere over the last couple of days, the only option left is that somebody on their esports team is completely incompetent and needs to be fired. And it doesn't take somebody with a big communications degree to figure this out. Myself, with my audiovisual and multimedia background, I've actually found myself agreeing 100% with Asmongold on this situation. Now, myself and Asmongold are very different people. We live very different types of lives and run in very different circles. Therefore, it's particularly bizarre whenever I agree with him as much as I do on something like this. He pointed this out on his stream while taking a look at some of the folks talking about this whole situation with Blitzchung. And he just gave a very simple suggestion that is actually 100% correct. And I'm going to go into some details on. How come this Hearthstone tournament wasn't broadcast on a delay? That seems like such a basic thing in broadcasting. And why do producers, broadcasters, what have you, why do folks doing these kinds of broadcasts or even radio use delays? In case something bizarre happens that they don't want being broadcast. Like, for example, someone could swear or use obscene language or do something bad on camera or over the air through the microphones or what have you that get like the radio or TV station fined by the FCC or something like that. But we don't even need to drag the government into this. Forget regulations and whether or not some agency or organization, media organization, can be fined for violating some regulation or code or some kind of standard of some sort. Forget all of that stuff. How about just between the broadcasters and the audience, the goodwill that exists? So say something happens on a broadcast that would annoy the heck out of or offend or tick off the audience to the point where it started affecting whether or not the people watching would still buy a company's products and services. A delay to possibly prevent a situation like that is a rather simple solution to this that broadcasting has had for a very, very long time. This is the internet we're talking about. Even if you want to brag about how you're broadcasting live, people's latency is going to introduce a delay all on its own. Why do you want to be able to brag about some live internet broadcast of something like an esports tournament? Why do you ever want to do that when it puts you at risk for something like this? That's the problem fundamentally that I have with J. Allen Brack's statement here is that, okay, yeah, Blitzchung took the focus of the broadcast away from the Hearthstone game, which was what it was supposed to be about. But there are ways of preventing situations like this from even being a thing in the first place. Put it on like a 5-minute or 10-minute delay or something along those lines. Put it on some kind of delay that allows the producers time where if something bizarre happens that they can cut away or they can go to a commercial or go to an ad break or something along those lines. But with all of these things that are out there that video producers and broadcasters can use to prevent stuff like this, it's not in good taste to blame shift everything over to the person who broke the rules. Because who's facilitating the broadcast here? Who has the crew that's supposed to know what they're doing when it comes to video production and broadcasting? Why are we even having this discussion at all? Why was this even allowed to happen when this question has been answered in the world of broadcasting for years? To bring this closer to home, imagine if you watched some kind of daytime talk show or game show or something, and then suddenly someone in the audience starts cursing a blue streak, flipping off the camera, doing all kinds of wild and crazy stuff, or maybe they just snap and go nuts, and what they're doing isn't really all that offensive. It's just weird and bizarre and makes you want to change the channel if you're watching at home, because what on earth? And then afterwards, the host says, sorry about that. The person that just did that signed off that as part of the audience, they were going to follow our rules. So it's their fault. They broke the rules. No, that's not the way it works. Not at all. Broadcasting and video production and even radio production has had this question answered for an extremely long time. This absolutely should not be the sort of thing that Blizzard is trying to blame shift, because it makes their esports division and whoever was producing this or whoever made the decision to have it be live look very, very, very bad at their job. Probably to the point where they should be let go for it. Maybe HR has already done something in regards to this that we don't know about. This kind of stuff tends to be confidential. But do you see where I'm coming from here? The only logical options are that this is either malicious or incompetent, and in trying to move the needle away from malicious, what Blizzard has done here is move the needle more towards incompetent. That they're not very good at esports broadcasting to let a gaffe like this cause the uproar that it has caused, or even if, say, they had taken the other approach to this and they had not done hardly anything at all, risked an uproar in Beijing. So this blue text can say all it wants about derailing and disrupting the broadcast, but this is something that broadcasters all across the history of this kind of stuff have had to figure out how to deal with, and these questions have been answered for a very, very, very long time. This doesn't really give me high hopes for BlizzCon if this kind of stuff is going to show up in the official response to this situation. By the way, corporate communications is a very, very, very serious thing, to the extent that if you work for a company and you do something that could be considered speaking for the company when you're not authorized to do so, it's a very, very easy way to get fired. So this isn't just some doodly email that J. Allen Brack typed up before leaving the office on Friday. No way. This is something that had to have been vetted and gone over and checked against, and maybe legal had to take a look at it. This is this blue post, what looks like a blue post to us, probably took an awful lot of work just to get posted at the end of the day on a Friday, though people are upset about that sort of thing in the first place. So this cannot possibly be any kind of off-the-cuff thing. So I intend on taking this very, very seriously, and as a result, this is kind of a negative in the whole question mark about BlizzCon. So I imagine some folks will probably bring this up at BlizzCon, and they'll probably get thrown out of the convention for it or something. Or maybe we won't see it. That's the thing. If we see something like this on the BlizzCon broadcast, then we know that Blizzard has not learned their lesson with any of this. Run the thing on a delay. Do some kind of, there's preventative measures to avoid bizarre stuff like this. You can cut away during the Q&A section if security has to escort someone out for trying to hijack a Q&A session or something like that. There's ways of dealing with this. I suppose when BlizzCon gets broadcast, we'll see if Blizzard's learned anything based on whether or not someone's able to do some wacky thing on camera like this. So, but that's the thing. I'm mostly looking to BlizzCon to get the answers I'm looking for with regards to exactly how delusional Blizzard is with the current state of WoW. I'm not really all that interested in whatever's discussed about Diablo or StarCraft or anything else there. At this point, I'm an ESO guy. I mean, there's two ways that I'm involved with MMOs these days. There's story mode, where I just want to play through the content and see the story and whatnot if it looks interesting. Same as if I were playing an offline game, if I wanted to play through, a game to see what the story was and be entertained by it. But then there's MMOs where the world is compelling enough that I want to be involved all the time and do the whole escapism, live another life thing with my characters basically telling me a story through even the daily minutia of being involved in that world of theirs. So right now, Tamriel has a lot more appeal to me in that category than Azeroth does. So we'll see what happens at BlizzCon, but this does not bode well for this sort of thing. And I was looking for this to be talked about at the Final Fantasy Tokyo Fan Fest early in the year as well, because I was curious about the trust system and how far that feature was going to go in that game as well. But maybe I'll just go play my sight unseen copy of Shadowbringers I pre-ordered and never got around to see something like that. So thanks for the response. Thanks for keeping it civil, and I'm more than happy to do follow-up segments talking about listener feedback in response to comments and things along those lines. But yeah, I'm not going to get too wrapped up in this Blitzchung fiasco because, as we've seen, now that Blizzard has an official statement that they're rescinding some of the things that they initially chose to do after looking things over one more time, you now have a lot of knee-jerk YouTube commentators who reacted to this, some of them with very big audiences, that their videos are now inaccurate because of this. And you know how YouTube's algorithms are. There's a very good chance that in putting things in order, someone might see the inaccurate version of the video instead of the one that they correct if they make two of them. So, and annotations aren't a thing anymore, so how on earth are YouTubers going to deal with something like this if they now have an inaccurate video on their channels because of this? Then again, I'm not going to go too wild about that either. After all, Angry Joe's review of Elder Scrolls Online from when it first launched is still out there too, so. But that is another discussion entirely. This is MultimediaJay Radio Style. Don't touch that dial.